All right, folks, all the way from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, straight down to L.A., good old Los Angeles, for my next guest. This is legendary drummer Patty Schemel on the line with me today. How you doing, Patty?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, now, I know the big news of the moment, of course, is that your memoir, Hit So Hard, has come out October 31st via DeCapo, and I did mention off the top that I'm from the Northwest Territories, and of course this isn't the first connection that you've had to Canada's north, is it?
No, you mean our trip way up to Tuktoyaktuk, or do you mean Melissa Oftermauer, Canadian, or do you mean growing up close to Vancouver? Three things.
Because I'm from the Northwest Territories, I guess we can kick things off by talking about the. I don't know if you'd call it an ill-fated trip to Tuk, but of course, you do briefly talk about the trip in your book, and I think it comes up in the documentary as well, doesn't it?
Right, it does. There's footage of that trip, and it was so strange. To fly into an area for this corporate event sponsored by Molson for 500 contest winners and play a show in the middle of nowhere. It was sort of like, okay, we're going to fly into your town and just upset your village for a moment and then leave. It's so awkward.
Yeah. Well, now, your book sort of doesn't pull any punches, and I think one of the things that kind of comes up is that you were just concerned about scoring some drugs, basically, and wondering how that was going to work, especially in an isolated little community like Tuktoyaktuk, which was also technically considered a dry community, like not even alcohol.
Yes. Yeah, which was strange because it was sponsored by a beer company. Yeah, at that point in the book, that trip was full of drama, at least for me personally, just because of the condition I was in, being strung out on heroin and having to do that show. And then also, it was with Metallica and that whole entire, machine of rock.
Yeah.
And Bruk Assault. And I think Moist was another band that was like a Canadian band that was on that.
Well, now, I don't want to dwell too much on this, Patty, but I mean, I did, through the wonders of the internet, managed to pull up, I don't even know how legit this is, but it's just a little blurb on the concert itself when you guys played your set, and this person says the band sounded good, but singer Courtney Love didn't during her obscene ramblings. Even band members seemed upset with her. The guitarist threw down his guitar at one point in disgust. I mean, do you have these specific memories of the event and it sort of playing out kind of the way it's described here?
No, I don't remember the show itself. It was just another show in like a series of a lot of shows. And at that point, that show was at the end of a long world tour. So yeah, it probably just blended into a memory of a bunch of shows,
Yeah, well,
so not, yeah.
I was just going to say, maybe at that point too, you were sort of maybe desensitized isn't quite the right word, but I mean, your descriptions of Courtney's stage persona, I suppose would be the right way of putting it, seems to be bang on with what this particular person is saying, that you guys were kind of maybe used to the stage antics, the ramblings, the kind of train wreck type behavior that the band had kind of, become.
Gotten used to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, some shows were, I click off into the first song of the set and it would, I'd know, oh, this is going to be one of those shows where it's all talk and, running around, etc. And then other times there'd be, we just do the set and things would be, we'd have a great show. And so it was always, that was one of the biggest things of, I never really knew what kind of show we were going to play I mean, when I sat at my drums,
I think like in points in the documentary hit so hard, it captures your facial expression perfectly when Courtney's sort of in the middle of. Well, I think there's quite a number of eye rolls that are
right.
on
There's
camera.
a bunch of reactions.
I was surprised now to learn. I mean, maybe I should have known this being a child of the 90s, and actually I grew up in Vancouver, so, just a stone's throw away from everything when it was going down. But you physically lived with Kurt and Courtney for a short period of time when Hole was just starting up.
Yeah, in LA, when we were rehearsing and trying to get a bass player and, learning all the old songs and learning all the new songs, and writing new stuff. Yeah,
I guess in a lot of respects, and I think just as I was reflecting on the book and the documentary and everything, I mean, you were sort of you sort of had a ringside seat, I suppose, for everything that went down in Seattle, but then at the same time you were a participant in everything as well, and it's amazing to just read some of the stories, both heartwarming, funny, and thought-provoking, sort of all rolled into one at times.
Yeah, I mean, they were great. It was an amazing time, and there were great memories. It was also I didn't want to gloss over or romanticize my drug addiction, and that's where it really started to kick off, at those times, and that grind of going on tour and then coming home, getting clean, and then getting strung out, and it's just like in and out of rehab, and none of it had anything to do with anybody else. It was about how I dealt with my schedule and just eventually the deaths of good friends, and just that was sort of the way that I could turn it all off when I wanted to, with all the feelings and stuff. So and I wanted to explain that and just sort of like not make that time and heroin addiction cool,
Yeah. You definitely captured it, and it's at its absolute worst. I mean, this is really heavy subject matter, and I suppose this is probably excruciatingly obvious comment, but just for the sake of conversation, I mean, it must have been very difficult for you to go back to those streets and those times and revisit a lot of what went down, eh? Yeah,
it was difficult to go back and to revisit the moments and write it out. And I mean, it's a good thing, I guess, to not forget those times, so that way I don't, when it comes, it's good to just know that happens when I pick up, drugs and alcohol. So, but it was difficult to write it all down,
Yeah. One moment that really struck me was, there's a story that you tell in the book, and I think it's maybe one of the first times you went to shoot heroin, and you run into, Lane Staley, and he's having a perfectly normal conversation, but he's injecting heroin directly into a vein in his neck like it was just nothing. I mean, is this sort of how this heroin culture in Seattle had escalated, I suppose maybe would be the right word?
For some that can afford to have a heroin habit where it is, you never have there's no end to, your money. So you can constantly have access, and then it becomes difficult to, I guess in a way it was just part of how. So there's that, that you eventually start shooting up in your neck and it's not a big deal. And I think it's because it's the way we all self-medicate, it's the way that we all, back then. And it was like the way that, it was, well, of course it wasn't, I wasn't like just used to that. You know, I made a mention of it in the book, like Wayne shooting up in his neck. You know, is that not? You know, it got to that point for that's where it goes. You know, that's where it goes, I guess, is what the point was in that too.
Now, you came up drumming in the 80s at first, and, you know, I've read lots of different memoirs over the years and stories about bands, and I know, like, in a book that I'm reading kind of currently about the band The Runaways, there's stories about Sandy West and how hard she had to fight just to be able to get on the instrument and earn an ounce of respect. I mean, you know, seeing as you were learning in the 80s, you know, maybe 7 or 8 years post Runaways, and then of course coming up in the 1990s, I mean, was the fight similar for you to be in that, on that, drum throne, so to speak?
Yeah. I guess what I always felt that when I sat at my drums, I had to prove myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I definitely, that was a struggle to be respected and to be, you know, legit as a drummer. And so I had to prove myself each time. So yeah, I totally relate.
Bringing things back to your time with Hole, you know, thinking about yourself and your own drumming style, I mean, you know, historically, you know, what did you personally feel you brought to the band? I know a lot of other people maybe have potentially speculated, but I mean, what was your own personal take on that time?
You mean musically? What did I bring?
Musically, yes. Yeah.
Well, I guess when I joined, it was I brought a bit of structure maybe, and you know, like I loved Carolyn, their original drummer. I loved her style. It was really kind of tribal, and they were a bit of a noise band. And then it became, when I joined, I kind of brought dynamics, you know, with the song ideas and parts and song structure. And so I think I brought that to it, you know, a little bit more of a more structure to songs. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, listening to Live Through This, of course, which is, you know, the studio record of you being in the band. I mean, you're very in the pocket. And you know, I know, I'm sure everybody has their favorite track, but you know, the one that always strikes me is the track Violet, because you come in with sort of almost like a pseudo bossa nova type groove. I mean,
yeah.
where did that groove come from, and you know, what made you think about inserting, you know, more of a Latin flair into an otherwise pretty straight ahead punk rock song?
That was kind of an idea that was sort of like existed, and that Eric was saying, well, what about something like this? And he was sort of explaining it, and that's how that came up, and that's the beat I came up with, you know, from that explanation. And yeah, so it kind of was awkward, but yeah, it kind of works.
I was gonna say, now you talk about your process and how things were written, and how in the studio Courtney was pretty particular about the specific drum tones, and you know, how exactly she wanted things to sound. I mean, you know, and I think that's something maybe that's, you know, maybe her stage antics and persona commonly, you know, overshadow the fact that she has one hell of a voice, and not only that, but she also knew a lot about music, and I thought that was a really cool aspect that you brought out in your book.
She, you know, has really, her instincts are good and cool, you know, and so Eric was her sort of her partner in that, and he understood what she meant, and eventually, you know, what, after playing together, she and I would kind of sort of know. I would know what she meant when she was trying to execute something. She might not be able to explain it in musical terms, but we would get there, you know, by using like sort of other bands as as a reference point.
Through this, I think what becomes really apparent is this book is kind of the redemption of Patty Schemel, I mean, things, have gone really well for you, in particular the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, there's a marriage and a partner that can love and support you, and of course, you've also got a little girl too.
Yeah, I still love playing music, but also it's not my whole life, and that's another part of the story, was that that I had to discover more about myself, and that music wasn't everything, and that once I kind of got things sort of right-sized and aligned, and got clean and sober, it just seemed, my life got a lot better.
And you've got a dog walking big business, but you also you teach private lessons, or you do rock and roll camps with drums as well, I think is what I
do rock camp for girls each summer, and I'm a big supporter of that program and teaching girls how to play, and it's about teaching them how to play instruments, but it's a lot more, it's like empowering girls too. So I think it's a really cool program.
Yeah, I was just thinking, now there's some pretty poignant things in the documentary as well, where a few of your students are just talking about their, I guess, wanting to play drums in a rock and roll band. And I mean, it begs the question now that it's 2017, are we still in that world where, girls shouldn't play drums? I would like to think that maybe even with a trailblazer like yourself, and, maybe more recently Meg White, that, altruistically, I hope not,
Yeah.
Like, I hope
agree.
that people can be accepted for who they are,
Yeah, I agree. I think there is, I see a lot more girls playing drums. You know?
I was going to just get to this because in a couple of days, I have this in front of me here in my notes. Our Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on November 28th is going to issue a formal apology to LGBTQ2, who have been taken advantage of by the government over the years. I mean, have you heard of this?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's interesting now. I think, one common thread in Canada is, of course, the thread of reconciliation with our Aboriginal people. But just in the last couple of weeks, our Prime Minister has, said that on the 28th he was going to issue I'm looking for the words here in my notes, a comprehensive apology for past persecution of sexual minorities, and the apology is the culmination of almost 2 years of investigations and reports, beginning with a series in the Globe and Mail. That's a paper in Canada. I mean, what are your thoughts on an apology of this nature? And I mean, I would imagine you'd probably agree, but I mean, does an apology need to be issued in the United States as well?
Well, of course, but I wouldn't see that happening from our government right now today. the one that's But I love Justin Trudeau. I think so that is a kind gesture, but I just don't see that kind of thing. We're currently getting all the rights that we fought for taken away slowly here in the States. Yeah, so shitty. Yeah.
Well, listen, the book is called Hit So Hard, and it is by author, drummer extraordinaire Patty Schemel, and it came out October 31st via Da Capo Press, and I would strongly recommend it, just being a person that's read a lot of, rock and roll autobiographies, but I mean, at the same time, this is about so much more, and Patty, I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation today and just delve a little bit into it.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you. Let's talk.
Right on. And I wish I had the power to say hello from the people of Tuktoyaktuk, but I guess I can represent the people of Yellowknife here in the Northwest Territories, which is a little bit further away than the Arctic Circle. But, a big hello. And, of course, as they say here, Masi Cho, which means thank you for being on Do You Know Jack today.
All right. Thank you very much.